We begin tonight with a special investigation into chemicals in your drinking water. We got a tip from a viewer concerned about the safety of water wells in their neighborhood. The Virginia Department of Environmental Quality is now trying to figure out how gasoline particles got into wells in Franklin County. WDBJ7's investigative reporter Isabella Ledonne is looking into what the chemicals are and what the DEQ is doing about it.
More than a dozen homes in the Coopers Cove neighborhood tested positive for petroleum compounds in their drinking water. Neighbors tell me they're concerned about what the long-term effects are, and they want to know how long they've been drinking the contaminated water. The DEQ says it's testing water wells and nearby streams after a Coopers Cove homeowner tasted and smelled petroleum in their water.
We first found about it in November, and we were immediately on site, beginning investigations and providing safe drinking water.
The chemical, known as MTBE, is often added to gasoline to help it burn cleaner, and it dissolves in water. But not much is known about what happens if you're exposed to the contaminant.
While it's not a known carcinogen, there is a health advisory for MTBE.
It can get into drinking water from underground gasoline storage tanks leaking or from car accidents where petroleum gets onto the road.
At least 2 sources have been identified so far, and we're still investigating at this time.
I asked what those sources were, but DEQ did not answer, citing the ongoing investigation. 18 homes now have a carbon filtration unit to make their water safe to drink and use.
They're filled with the same granular carbon that might be in a refrigerator pitcher, and it's filtering that water and absorbing the compounds and giving you safe drinking water on the other end.
But the filters are only a temporary solution.
I would say in the next month, we'll have more information about possible sources and some plans for providing a permanent source of drinking water.
The Virginia DEQ is continuing their investigation, and they are still looking for long-term solutions. We'll be following this story, and we'll bring you any updates.
We have an update to a story we first brought you in January. The Virginia Department of Environmental Quality is looking into long-term solutions for contaminated water in Franklin County. Target 7 investigator Isabella Ledonne joins us now in the studio. So Isabella, petroleum chemicals were found in drinking wells at 18 homes a few months ago. So what has the state done since then?
Natalie, all of the affected homes now have a carbon filtration unit that makes their water safe to drink. But when I spoke with neighbors, they wondered how petroleum particles could get into their water. DEQ's recent report revealed leaking underground oil tanks as the source, and it's an issue throughout the entire state.
It's a real problem. It really is.
William and Sharon Latham are one of 18 families in the Coopers Cove neighborhood that had MTBE levels in their drinking water. That's a chemical compound often found in gasoline. They say they didn't notice anything peculiar about their water.
We never tasted it.
But were concerned for their health and home value when they found out from the DEQ back in December.
The health issues, we both have already had some issues, and we didn't know what those were contributing to what had caused it. That's still in the back of your mind of, that we're not going to get full value for what we paid for the house.
Just up the road from the Latham's house, the DEQ discovered 3 underground gasoline storage tanks were leaking. The tanks were buried in the late 1970s for a plumbing business and emptied out in the late 1990s. They stayed underground for decades under the assumption they were cleaned out. But testing in November 2023 revealed there was at least 1 inch of oil left in the tanks. A DEQ spokesperson says that oil was leaking into the neighborhood drinking water.
3 1,000-gallon tanks were identified and removed, along with 157 tons of contaminated soil around it. To halt the further spread of any potential contamination.
DEQ placed filtration units in the homes for safe drinking water, but it's only a temporary solution.
We want to have a reliable, safe, long-term source of drinking water, and so they're looking into potential water lines or other options that'll be more permanent than these filtration units.
Reports of leaking underground oil tanks happen all throughout Virginia. The DEQ says this incident in Franklin County is one of the larger impacts to homes that they've seen. Natalie, Virginia has had more than 49,000 reports of leaking underground storage tanks since 1973. In part 2 of our investigation, I look into why this is still an issue and what the DEQ is doing about it. That's tomorrow at 6.
The Virginia Department of Environmental Quality is expanding its investigation of contaminated water in Franklin County. It comes after water in 18 homes in Cooper's Cove tested positive for a chemical often found in gasoline. Target 7 investigator Isabella Ledonne joins us now in studio. Isabella, in part one of your investigation, we learned leaking underground storage tanks caused the contaminated drinking water. What is the DEQ doing now?
Jean, the department is looking for other underground storage tanks nearby that could also be a source for the contaminated water. This is not the first time the DEQ has removed a leaking tank. In fact, the case in Franklin County was one of nearly 1,000 cases the DEQ investigated over the last year. An investigation revealed 3 underground storage tanks in the Cooper's Cove neighborhood were leaking, contaminating the drinking water for 18 homes. The tanks, or USTs, were buried in the late 1970s before Virginia DEQ put regulations in place. Nearly 18,000 active USTs in the state are registered and inspected for compliance every year. But it's difficult for the state to manage the tanks that were placed before the regulations went into effect in the late 1980s.
I know it's absolutely fallen out of fashion.
DEQ spokesperson Irina Kalos says some homeowners may not even know they have a UST.
That's really one of the issues, when it's something that needs to be maintained. If people don't know about it, it's, they're not going to maintain it.
There have been more than 49,000 cases of UST releases in Virginia since 1973. Oil leaks impact multiple Virginia households 1 to 3 times a year.
Oil doesn't belong in water. Petroleum doesn't belong in water. It's not something any of us should be drinking.
The DEQ removed the 2 underground storage tanks that were here, but they added these markers so they can continue to monitor petroleum levels. The department also monitors UST facilities. In last year's report, only 46% of facilities met the technical compliance rate for spill prevention and release detection. Kalos says the state has a tank program for UST owners.
We have a fund to help clean up incidents like this, because it's not just your drinking water that could be affected. It could be your neighbors. It could be streams. It's in all of our best interests to make sure that potential contamination is addressed.
The DEQ also says you should report any potential leaks within 24 hours, and owners can detect a leak by noticing a sudden drop in fuel levels or if there is any unexplained water in the tank.
And Chief Meteorologist Brent Watts joining us now for some perspective.
And Brent, can you tell us a little bit about if any of the rain that we've seen in the last couple of weeks could possibly have an impact on these underground storage tanks?
Right, it's a good question. So I brought our virtual technology, so let's take a look at that, and we're going to bring up what we look at when it comes kind of a cross section of that. So I'm going to take you through a couple things and point it out. So one, the well casing, that's that white pipe that you see going way down into the ground. You want your well, homeowners want their wells way deep into the main water table. Right. So that's what you're seeing there. Now there's not just one little layer of water that's underground. There's multiple layers of it. It's kind of like a cake, the ground is. And so sometimes what could happen is that contamination can get out and over time could get into some of those other water tables. The perched water table can sometimes be a little bit higher, a little closer to the ground level. It could stay there for years, sometimes even decades, until just in that water. But because your well casing is pulling from way below ground, right, it's not impacted. But then over time, whether it be because of heavy rain that comes down, we could sometimes see that get even farther down into the ground, into that main water table. And it's then when you start to see some of that contaminants being pulled into your well. So it's all about over time. It can take sometimes years, even decades, for those to reach all the way down to your main water table. I think it's interesting to see, those tanks that you were talking about yesterday, even today, put in during the 70s,
70s, sometimes
80s,
even earlier than that.
I know. So just takes that long for you to sometimes see the impacts because of how deep the well is, how much rain sometimes pushes it down, and also the soil and the rock that's underneath the ground.
And you're talking about underground storage tanks, but then think of all the other things that are put on lawns that could potentially, with rainwater, make their way down through those layers.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, good story.
Right. Well, thank you. And Brent and Jean, as for the case in Franklin County, those underground storage tanks have now been removed, as well as 150 tons of contaminated soil that were around the tanks that were also impacted by that gas leak. You can find part 1 of our investigation over on our website.